moderated by Carlos Martinez. Many of you have met him, CTO and Technology Manager at LACNIC. Jorge Cano, who has participated in IETF for more than a decade and more recently is part of the chairs of the working group of REGEXT, Registration Protocols Extensions. Then we have Georgie Palette, who started to contribute in 2001 and since then has actively participated in IETF working groups, particularly in the context of IPv6 and IoT, who is one of the organizers of the last IETF event in Madrid. With us is also Suresh Krinan. He is an active participant at the IETF and member of the Internet Architecture Board, the IAB. He works on artificial intelligence and interoperability. He will be participating remotely. And finally, we have Benoit Claes, who is co-chair of the working groups at IETF, at OPSOC, and the Management Operations Network in IETF.
Gracias por estar aquí. Adelante, Carlos.
Gracias, Ale. ¿Tenés ahí?
Vale.
Bueno, gracias a todos. Gracias.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We have a very interesting panel about IETF and how some of the standard protocols we all use or produce. Let me just ask a quick question. What is IETF? Who does not know what it is? Okay, great. Now, let's speak about the organization. I will do a very quick introduction and then hand the floor over to the panel. My only contribution to these slides was translating them, were created by Suresh and Greg Wood. Now, IETF is an organization, it's a non-profit organization, and it is an umbrella organization to standardizing the documents that the very well-known RFCs are based on. Our protocols are defined in documents that are called RFC and are discussed in dynamic that is very similar to LACNIC's Spice Forum, in trying to reach consensus in how we specify those protocols and create mechanisms through which computers can exchange information accurately, safely, and so on. The IETF has a very long history. It's turned 53 or 54 years. It's one of the oldest organizations in our internet ecosystem. And well, on screen you can see the mission. I will not read it. There are some aspects, very valuable aspects to the organization that I believe are truly relevant. And you'll see that there is a lot of similarities to what we encourage in LACNIC. This is open participation work. Their work is available free of charge, and there are no politics involved. Everything is judged on their merit. RFCs are not mandatory standards, as could be the case for other organizations. The success or the failure of one specification is actually defined by you. The voluntary deployment of these protocols, TCP/IP, has been very successful because as a technical community, we've all decided that these, although has disadvantages, it's still a solution, and that's why it's become so successful. This is a very great picture. It's a hackathon from the IETF. That quite old picture. It was taken some time ago. But it shows what we do. We work on consensus, based on consensus, and the running code. Running code is great. It's implementations that actually do work and are interoperable. Those are very two important values in the implementation of IETF protocol. Some statistics or parameters, if you may, in terms of the IETF community by sector and by region and gender. The participation of Latin America, as you can see, is quite low, actually. And that's why we wanted to have this panel here today. So for those of you who are not familiar, to let you know who they are, what they do, because that's very important. And for everyone to just get the message that it's not only possible but also important that we participate. That's a little bit more of the same. You know how thin the line for Latin America is. That is the number of authors for RFCs per region. Well, the evolution of the registries, then that slide. I don't want to read all the content to take time away from the panel, but that's how we can participate. It's not really different from how LACNIC works and LACNIC's Public Policy Forum. We do not have the same concept, but yes, the discussion list, consensus, determination, how the chairs or working group chairs, that's what they're called under the IETF, we do have the same. And something else quite important to consider, IETF meets 3 times a year in person, we meet 2. All activities can be followed remotely. It's not necessary to travel to participate. You can just work remotely for the approval of a document as well. So in that QR code, you'll find a link to the IETF's website where you'll find more information as how to participate. So without further ado, on this very brief introduction, I will like to kickstart the panel. My memory is turned quite bad, so let me just use my cheat sheet. So we'll start with, well, the first question for all panelists, and I would like to hear from all of you. So it's just to break the ice. How did you get involved with IETF for the first time? When was your first time participating or engaging with the IETF?
Sorry, it's in English, no Spanish or Portuguese. I was involved the first time in the IETF by accident, completely. At that time, I recall I was working for Cisco as a customer support engineer. And I knew pretty well one of the protocols called NetFlow, or flow record management if you are in automation. And one of my friends told me, they're going to standardize NetFlow in the IETF. You should be going, because I was teaching NetFlow. And I said, no, I'm a customer support engineer. I don't go to the IETF. And then I called engineering, and engineering, they said, we have no time for that. Then I called the project management, and they said, I'm not technical, I'm not going. So I said, I will go to the IETF, and if I say something stupid, it's your fault. So that's how I was involved. It was like a BOF, a bird of a feather, which is a meeting to decide if we want to work on something in the IETF. And that meeting was successful, and we created a working group called IP Flow Information Export, where we standardized NetFlow, and I was busy there for a couple of years. Now, obviously, in that buff, I was completely scared, right? So I was a simple guy, and I was presenting to all the people who invented and standardized the internet. So I knew my presentation by heart, completely. I fake it. I was very nervous. But in the end, it was successful. And 2 meetings after, there was another buff, which was about packet sampling. And same thing, they asked me, can you present? And that became a working group, and I was involved that way. So first as a buff member, then as an author of documents. Then I put my finger into something where my arm was gone, and I became, in the end, work group chair, and I became area director, and I'm still involved these days because I like this community.
Gracias. Jordi.
Yo empecé a...
Thank you, Jordi. I heard about IETF in 1999. At the time I was starting to get involved with IPv6. At the beginning, I was just reading the email list, and finally in 2001, I dared to participate. Then I participated in our anti-EU project, and my first one was in 2001 summer in London. And ever since then, except maybe those during the pandemic, I haven't missed any, maybe 1 or 2. and I basically focus on IPv6, but I've also worked on other fields. I think I am subscribed to all of the IETF email lists. Pretty much all. I try to follow all the topics, although sometimes I don't manage to cover them all. But it was no accident in my case. It was fully on purpose. It was hard for me at the beginning to get involved and to engage. And it was hard to write my own documents. At first, I tried making contributions to other authors' documents. And I think that this is something that you learn by doing. First, you have to listen, then you learn how to participate. You shouldn't get scared. Many times we feel afraid of the microphone, and that's the same with the public policy forum, and then at the end of the day we'll all have a beer together. But that is basically my experience. What is curious is that ever since the first IETF, I said I have loved this. I need to bring IETF to Madrid, and that's taken 25 years, but that's a whole different story. So what can you say about IETF in Madrid? Well, that will be later on. Rich? I can't hear him. We cannot hear your audio. If you give us one moment. Jorge, let's go with you first. How did I started getting involved with the IETF? Well, about 15 years ago, I worked for NIC Mexico. It's the organization responsible for managing .mx in Mexico. And back then, my team and I were assigned the task of implementing IPP. It is a communication protocol that allows vendors to offer their clients MX domains or domains from other registries in a standardized way, in a simple way. At the time, I was looking at the RFCs for the first time, IETF's documents, to see how to implement that server, what we need to do, what we need to reply, what the communication format was like, how the communication went about. So we implemented the server and the client in that case. After managing to implement the server and we went live and everything was great, we then decided, or we came up with a brilliant idea that was what is known about signing the DNS zone. We signed MX, the entire MX zone, and to do so at the time, we looked for tools to do that signing. None of those tools convinced us. They were quite green at the time. They were just emerging, and we decided to create one from scratch. So to learn how to implement it, how to code, we needed to read IETF documents. Suresh, let's try again. Let's see if we can hear you. No los escuchamos. No los escuchamos. I can't hear him. We can hear you from the booth.
RFC author, working group chair, then an area director, and now I'm really happy to see a lot of participation from the LACNIC community. It didn't exist very much before the Buenos Aires meeting. There's like very few people who are participating. Carlos was there, and I think we slowly but surely increasing the participation from the LACNIC region, as Carlos was pointing out. Thank you.
Gracias, Suresh. Bueno, les comento un poco cómo vamos a organizar el resto de su trabajo en distintas áreas. Es decir, hay un área que...
Okay, so IETF disaggregates different areas. For example, the internet area, discussing internet, the protocol. There's also a security area. Now, my intention is for our panelists to explain their own area, what are the challenges, what are the new topics, what are the relevant topics, those places where it's easier for participation. Maybe it is easier to engage when we have a new problem rather than something that's been in discussions for a long time. So let me start with Jorge. He is the co-chairs of the Reggae group, and he deals with what we call directory services. Maybe you know as the WHOIS and the ERAP. We've mentioned this a few times during the week, and we'll probably continue to do so for the rest of the week. So Jorge, what do you think are the main challenges, the main opportunities that your working group faces, and particularly the area that tackles directory services issues? And what do you think are the new areas in across this topic? Well, we've been working for many years, particularly now with Red App, and before, well, we had DPP extensions that we discussed in the group. It is a very small group, and the risk is, well, when there's one person missing, the group becomes even smaller. So we would like to have more participation from the community, would like to have more people engaged, especially in our area. We want, based on Red App, the option to query information about the objects that have been registered. And I think the main challenge is that to have more diversity in terms of the participation and people putting forward their ideas. And this has happened not only with IETF. My background is a developer. So until we actually listen to those who are actually operating the systems, we might miss some things. In many cases, we presented a product to those operating, and when we asked, what do you think about the software? And they would say, well, it is good, but maybe if it had this or this and that, it would be better. And that only took 5 minutes to implement. We didn't implement it before because we didn't think of it. So basically, until we listen from those who are working with it day by day, it just helps us come up with better ideas to create a better solution. Great, Jorge. Jordi.
Jordi, this is a big question for you, but related to IPv6. Which is your main area of interest in this context? Yes, as I mentioned previously, basically I'm focused on IPv6. The thing is that we also have to take into account that this is cross-cutting. Ultimately, IPv6 and the working groups that are more focused on IPv6 are 6-man, which is maintaining the protocol, the basis, and basic shops, which is how we deploy IPv6. But ultimately, this has to do with security issues, which is a different area. 6-man and 6-ops are in different areas. One is in the operations areas, and the other one is in the internet area. But we also have all the working groups related to Internet of Things, in addition to mainly routing. Also DNS, what often occurs at IETF, and this is not specifically for IPv6, is that certain tasks of a specific working group has to review other working groups. For example, elements involving transition that go to V6 ops and have to do with the working groups of DNS. So really, that is more or less the current situation. I think that it is important to find your focus of interest. So ultimately, you will be touching upon several points, and very often that is why you have to register in different lists, although you don't participate actively. Okay, that's a very interesting point, and what I mentioned regarding the division in the different areas, but very clearly many of these protocols or all of the areas are cross-cutting. Along that same line, Suresh also has experience in IPv6, but his angle is IPv6 in mobile networks. Suresh?
Sorry, Suresh, tu audio no está saliendo. Vamos a probar de vuelta. Perdón.
We cannot hear Suresh. Can you try again? Benoit? Benoit has worked a lot on what he was saying regarding NetFlow, and more recently, and this is something I find most interesting, namely network management. So, Suresh, as you see the work of IETF in the area of network management, he's correct himself. The work of IETF in network management, the work of IETF in network management, as he's repeating this, and what are the challenges you face?
What we want to do in operation is that we want to reduce the cost of operation by automation. So, for example, I was attending a pretty good tutorial yesterday on RPKI, right? So the main thing was about you configure your own router for RPKI. Then the last part of the session was like, okay, now how do we automate this? Because there were hundreds working groups. So you cannot just set up your lab. So the way it was done is configuring all of these working groups, the 100 working groups for tutorial, like this. So this is the challenges that we have to face. Google was telling already more than 10 years ago, if one feature cannot be automated, it doesn't exist. Because the networks are becoming so large, and the frequency of changes is so high that technically it's not feasible to do this from the CLI. So this is what we've been doing. We've been doing on netconf and resconf with the data model, a data model called Yang. And the Yang model generates an API. So now we could have APIs to the network. That's one thing. Now, this is one of the challenges we're getting there. Now, telemetry. Here is the thing. I've been configuring my network with a schema called Yang. I could be monitoring the network, but with what? With syslog, which is in English or Spanish or Portuguese, so someone has to read this, or with MIP, maybe, but the point is that if I'm configuring in one schema, I want to also monitor the same schema. What is the end goal? The end goal is that closed loop. A machine will be thinking about the inputs and the outputs, what is configured, what is observed, and try to come up with solutions. So we work on this Yang model telemetry called IETF Yang Push. What else? We work on the topology, which is called the digital map, or the CMAP, the service and infrastructure map. If I ask the operators here, or all enterprise people, what is the source of truth in your network? What is this? Is this what you have configured on the device? Is this what you have the intent in your controller? Is this your topology? Is this your IPAM, IP address management? Is this your inventory? So one of key building blocks is the topology that you've got, the digital map that you've got, and we're creating this one also with an API. What else? Something important is there are so many small or big issues in network that I've seen that operators only care about the issues that are service or customer impacting. So what we want to do is do the service assurance. And for each of these services, we want to look at anomalies, symptoms in the network. So anomaly detection and incident management. And what we're trying to do is something interesting, is that we try to codify those anomalies. Why? We could discuss the role of AI and machine learning, which is growing. The point is that when I go around the world and I see how many AI and ML people we have in operation, it's not a lot. So the solution is not individual. The solution is global. What I've seen is we start to have, and we're doing this in IETF, a way to codify the symptoms and the incident. So this implies that we could exchange those incidents, those symptoms, with other people, with other operators, because they're not all competition. So what we could be doing is looking, oh, I'm able to detect this anomaly in 1 minute with a confidence level of 80%. Can you do better with your tools? And vice versa. So we start to see, We're putting the foundation to exchange information also with the vendors, the router vendors, to go faster. So this is the type of things that we're working on. And one important question is, are we going to reduce the cost of operations doing all that? No, maybe not. But we will allow time for the operational engineer to do something more interesting, more services. So we have to automate, we have to go through this journey.
Gracias. Tenemos. Well, Suresh, puedes probar?
Suresh, can you try?
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
So, IPv6 mobile networks is a pretty long story. Right? Even in release 5, which is the 3G, what was called 3G.
Perdón, pero el audio es muy malo, casi no se oye. Perdón, está muy complicado para oír lo que dice Suresh. Disculpas.
A lot of mobile operators in the world to get them to do IPv6. And one key thing.
Un elemento clave que he notado es que hay una gran diferencia entre las direcciones de IP en el mundo desarrollado y el mundo en desarrollo. Por ejemplo, está la empresa Hewlett Packard, que tenía más espacio de IPv4 que India y China combinados. Y esto era como una situación despareja para Internet. IPv6 podría haber sido un habilitador importante para que más personas de los países en desarrollo puedan conectarse a Internet. Y resulta que mucho del despliegue de IPv6 está ocurriendo en países en desarrollo. Y en el sur global, por ejemplo, han dado un salto importante con respecto a los países desarrollados en el despliegue de IPv6. Y creo que resulta interesante, particularmente en la zona de la CNIC, porque comenzaron más tarde. IPv6 es algo que permite que las personas tengan una opción con una mejor relación costo-beneficio. Y para las personas, por ejemplo, en el caso de India, hay un operador que decidió hacer todo en IPv6. Y lo que se llama Geo, que es una forma en la cual el 70% pasó a integrarse. La utilización se hace más que nada en los teléfonos móviles y el IETF está tratando de que se gestionen las cosas a través de IPv6 solo, de manera que está tratando de hacer todo en esta opción, con este protocolo. Ay, estaba saliendo.
Si tuvieras que, bueno.
I have a question for Jordi. The IETF works the concept of working groups. This could be the policy forum.
Concreto.
Where we discuss something specific. Every area has many working groups, and I wanted to ask Jordi, because IPv6 is a version, something we'll be discussing throughout the week, and this is a topic of a lot of interest in the region because of the situation of the exhaustion of IPv4. If you were to identify 2 or 3 topics that are being discussed a lot in B6 Ops or in B6Man, if you have to identify something that is being discussed sufficiently and you'd like to be discussed in that group, what would you say? Well, evidently, the main objective of V6 Ops, I would say, because 6Man is not doing many changes, it's just about maintenance. There's no serious things that need to be modified in IPv6 and have been done in 6Man. But in V6 Ops, the goal is IPv6 only networks and IPv6 networks mostly. These are the 2 main topics, because we're all advancing towards a world where this might be different with IPv4, but we have to figure out those mechanisms whereby IPv4 can disappear in a transparent way and doesn't force us to what Bernard was saying. It wouldn't force us to pay higher costs. The cost should be reduced on their own. That is the ultimate goal. of IPv6 only, addressed at network operators networks, both for mobile and fixed networks, and also for IPv6 mostly, which is for more for corporate options. So these are the two main topics that are at the focus of V6 Ops. But if I look at the implications this has with other working groups, one of the topics precisely in this regard that will be done in V6 Ops, which is one of the things I'm dealing with right now, is that curiously enough, the transition mechanism that we're using mostly for all networks, which is 464 XLAT, and has a part that is NAT 6.4 and DNS 6.4, are not standards. This is what we call informational documents. So there are others that are standards because ultimately protocol includes many documents. So one of the aspects I'm going to deal with, and we have changed the V6 Ops chapter. We're modifying it right now in order to deal with all this within the working group chapter, is to put the document in the informational documents, standard of information. Well, many of you to know the several levels of standardization. So the ultimate standard is STV, not the RFC. So you want to take all those documents to that ultimate level along the path and somehow to show maturity to the market. This might sound like marketing, but this is important. Exactly the same thing was done with the IPv6 basis with RFC 6200. I think it's the 82. In other working groups, there are things that are either being done or have been done or are still pending. I could mention all the work involving HomeNet. I think that a lot of work remains to be done there. Much has been done, but much is still pending. Staff networks, and then SRv6. This is also very important, and if you're not paying attention, this involves really getting down to working on this, because I'm convinced that MPLS will end up dying. We haven't managed to use native IPv6 with native IPv6. So I think we'll take the hope from MPLS to segment routing in V6. This is one of the main points where a lot of work is being carried out, but the basis is there, and there are major deployments already in large networks. Of course, Internet of Things, we're going to start speaking about that, but a lot of work remains to be done in that field. And I was thinking of another one which now I'm forgetting. Oh yes, multi-homing. Yes, I think that multi-homing in IPv4 basically has been solved with NAT. Ultimately, that's the simplest way of solving this. In order to avoid the need, or in order to avoid the need of having your own prefixes, provider independent addresses, because in the case of ISPs, obviously they don't use NAT because the addressing is done with public addresses. But in IPv6, we have the problem that it is quite evident that Internet has become so necessary at any home. It's not only about businesses I'm speaking of, it has become so important at the home. It's like power, like water, like wastewaters. All these are absolutely essential in a home, and we're advancing towards a world in which you have people who depend on being connected to hospitals or to medical monitoring systems, because there's no capacity to have all people receiving good quality of life at a hospital.
They have better life quality at home, but it needs constant monitoring. They cannot just afford to have a single internet connection. If we think about IPv6 only, there's really not a better solution right now but to have their own addresses and maybe BGP that is not managed by that elderly person and not even close. It's done unsafe, but that is something that I believe we've not yet done enough. I don't know what the solution is. I know that we are thinking about it, but I don't know if we'll find a better solution, but we might all have IPv6 prefixes that have been assigned by the operator. I don't know right now if there's a better solution. Jorge, could you maybe think of a new document or a regex, maybe discussion? Well, that is a personal interest. I'm very curious to see how the new PIPEP definition will be. It's based on XML, which I know sounds to many of us like Egyptian hieroglyphics, something very, very old, although it's 15 years old. But the new definition is being done on JSON, being worked on by a different working group. But what will be defined by that working group, and to see how it can impact Red App using the same output format, the same JSON structure. So that is to see how data structure can be adjusted or maybe can find a way to impact what's being defined on Red App and how to enhance the protocol. I'm curious to see that and what is the progression around it. Okay, thank you. So in a way to wrap up the panel, we have one more question about participation and engagement for the IETF. And I would like to ask you all, the IETF, well, I have participated myself in discussions around the need for network operators, those who truly operate networks, to not necessarily come up with solutions, but maybe to clearly address what the problems are so the IETF can work on them. So what can regional operators do to engage and contribute to the IETF work? What can they contribute with operators? Not necessarily only by proposing solutions, but also in raising awareness on what the problems are.
That it's about problem statement. So, believe it or not, all the operators in the world, they have the same type of problems, right? In one of the working group I'm co-chairing, NMOP, we're inviting operators to come and share their problem. It's not easy to come publicly and to admit that you've been having a problem. However, by doing this, people start to realize that, oh, you had this problem, I had a similar one or slightly different. So as a consequence, we start working on these. So we've been having operators like Swisscom from Switzerland coming, Deutsche Telekom, Bell Canada, someone from Australia. We will have China Mobile, China Telecom. You mentioned regional operators. I mean, this is, to me, this is the same category. There is not like big operators and small operators. We all have the same type of problems. So one way could be that if you want, you come and share your incident. But the question is, what will you benefit from that? You will benefit of the connections with all the other operators which are maybe more advanced into one area and less in the other. And you will be part of this community. And what I start to see is that those operators now create a community and they even share their incidents, more incidents between each other. So it's a small step to be part of this gang or this community. So how to be involved? I would say sometimes it's sharing a problem statement, sometimes reading a document, sometimes providing feedback, just participating to the mailing list. Or here, you've got years of experience at the IETF. Just spoke to us and say, I have this problem. Can you help me? Is there something in the IETF? So this is what happened like this morning, and I'm going to review a config of one operator later in the afternoon. And that's perfectly fine. And what I could be doing is telling, you know what? This document, why don't you read it? Because that might be interesting for you in the future. So that's a way to be involved. Just speak to us to start with. Now, the point I want to make is that Jordi is the exception, going to all mailing lists. Don't do that, right? Select a small thing that you want to understand, that you want to contribute to. And then you're going to happen what happened with most of us like 25 years ago. You put your finger in there and your arm is gone because it's interesting.
Gracias. ¿Quién quiere seguir?
Se me ocurre, a ver, yo...
I've noticed that there's increase participation from operators. I think that we still have a long way to go. There's a Spanish operator, I won't name their name, but I have not seen them for many years. There was a person who would show up every so often, but all of a sudden they have now become super involved, and they send half a dozen, 10 people to IETF. They are always present. They're big contributors, and they are even co-chairing some groups. And I had not seen them do that before. And what they do is that they share problems, they look for solutions, and they try to come up with solutions with the rest of the operators. And we are not competing against one another. We are complementing one another. And there's another working group that might be a bit off the record. It's the IPG. It's a working group where we actually go there to share experiences about operations, basically. It is a working group that I think could be a great starting point for any point. Routing, DNS, IPv4, IPv6, it doesn't matter. We can share a lot. It's quite an informal group. It is very pleasant to engage. Sunday, 10 a.m., local time. I know all the timetables pretty much across the agenda. And that could be a great starting point for any of you who's interested in becoming involved and learning about the philosophy. And I find it very easy to participate in the ITG, and I would encourage everyone or anyone who has a problem to start there, because you could even find a solution or at least some guideline or feedback or recommendations on where to go. I think the ITG is it's a great test trial for many of our issues. Suresh, any comments? Suresh, can you hear us?
Path as Benoit. Try to find a small problem that you want to work on and start reading up the mailing list, read the drafts. And one thing which happened, thankfully, due to COVID, is that the remote participation in the IETF is fantastic. So that's something that anybody can participate. And we also worked on something to make sure that the fees are waived for people who cannot afford to pay them. So like that should not be a barrier for people. So the remote, if you're a remote participant and you cannot pay the registration fee, you can get a waiver with no questions asked. So participate in one or two meetings, and especially the ones that are like closer in time zone. So the North American and European meetings are closer in time zone. Please participate in meetings. Let's say Jorge is like chairing regex, like you can call into the meeting and see it as well as everybody in the room are participating in it. You can participate in the same way and use the same tool for the people in the room to participate as well. So you can get in the mic or make comments or like give input just as well as the people in the room, because they are going through the same process as you. So that is like one thing. And the second thing is really like if there's professors in the room, take your students, look at some problems, get them to people to participate in hackathon. The hackathons, there's quite a bit of work happening on the protocols, and a lot of the people end up writing drafts and standards afterwards. So if you're interested, like talk to like Carlos, like Jolie, Benoit, Jorge or me, and we'll be glad to help with some pointers on like the things you can look at. And that's kind of how we get the new blood into the IETF from all the regions, including like regions that are kind of underrepresented. Okay.
Benoit quería agregar algo.
Yes, I wanted to just add something to follow up on Suresh,
Okay.
because we targeted the audience of operators. But I look at the attendee list. There are many universities here.
Okay, yeah.
So what I've seen working pretty well as well is that we work with one university in Europe, and the professor is a fan of the IETF. As a consequence, he's bringing students to the hackathon. Sometimes those students are even paid by the operators to come. We've seen the same thing in India, where one professor was bringing students for the hackathon. And the students were very proud. They come to the hackathon, they were able to present their work, and they were involved in the IETF. Then, as a consequence, they were involved in the working group. So the first time it was remote participation for the hackathon. The second time it was 4 students. The next time it was 8 students. And I'm hoping for this time, we'll see. But this is a way to be involved and to teach the students about the leading problems we have in the IETF and with operators. And somehow what I observe is that those students become the best engineers. They are able to code, they're able to understand the technical problems, and they're coming to the standards.
Gracias. Jorge.
Sí, bueno, a mí me gustaría redondear un poquito más lo que ya se ha comentado.
Yes, I would like to add on to what was said here before. Many times when I design a new system, a new architecture, we are defining modules, pieces of the system, and you might find, well, this section, how am I going to solve this section of the system? And when you start researching, you'll find documents of the IETF that actually give the solution to that problem. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can use that document as the baseline, take what we need, take what we can use, or even open source implementations that actually give us the solution that we need. So what I would like to basically is to encourage everyone to participate. Come join the IETF, and I think the easiest way to do so is to find the area that is of your interest, sign up, join that mailing list, start following us, learn about how documents are managed, learn about the process, and become more and more engaged little by little. As Jordi is an exception, of course. I would not recommend joining all of the groups at the same time. Just pick one, gain more experience, and then maybe you can pick a few more groups. It's a good advice. Do not join all the mailing lists. Do not do what Jordi does. So that brings us to the end. We've been able to cover all the topics, but we have five minutes left. So Jordi, can you tell us your experience in organizing an IETF? I know that you could speak for 5 hours rather than 5 minutes, but what could you say in 5 minutes? My first IETF was in London in the summer of 2001. So when I came back home, I said, I need to bring it to Madrid. We need people in Spain participating and being able to bring it to your hometown, to your country, is a way of helping locals to become involved or engaged. It's not the only way of doing it, but I think it's important.
The point is that the decision of where the IETF meetings were held is about politics. Almost all took place in the United States and in Canada. But now the request was rejected again and again of organizing it. These were basically excuses. This was totally a subjective decision. And ultimately, the chair, after 3 to 4 years, I think it was 2003, 2004, Brian Carpenter said, you know how we do things here. We have to have a standard in order to define where the IETF is organized. So I worked on several documents, one involving the administrative parts, on the technical part. These documents were not produced. I wanted to include things such as forbidding and bringing weapons to where this was, the IETF meeting was held. They really wished to kill me because I didn't want them to have any weapons in the events. So these were not accepted, but afterwards they were accepted, and gradually I became involved in visiting all the hotel options in the major Spanish cities to determine the capacity, Madrid, Barcelona, and I told the Secretariat that this is a totally independent organization. The IETF has no infrastructure. So this is the best option whenever you wish to visit it, and ultimately in 2017, this was confirmed. Then we had the pandemic. This was delayed. First it took me 20 years and then 25 years. It couldn't be done in 2021. Once again, it was postponed until July 2025, which was this year. So my major effort, of course, was that we have a sponsor for funding the meeting. This was Ericsson from Finland. So it's finally a pool of sponsors who fund events for multiple years. with significant amounts of money, but my goal was to do things as best as possible. So I tried to figure out all the solutions that I saw things were failing when I went to an IETF meeting. And based on the feedback we received, I heard that this was the best IETF meeting ever. It was a great meeting because of the score we were given. Very similar to Bangkok. Bangkok exceeds us thanks to the food. I cannot deny that. But I think it becomes increasingly easier to organize an IETF meeting wherever. So if anyone wishes to organize one, I will gladly provide all the assistance. I have 25 years of experience. So I think I have learned all the tricks of what doors you have to knock on to solve everything. I think this is not so difficult. It ultimately depends on having the sponsors that wish to support this meeting. That is, of course, essential. So thank you very much, Jordi. Thank you very much, everyone. Jorge, Suresh, Jordi, Benoit. Thank you for joining us today. And well, with this we close the session, this morning's session. Thank you very much, everyone. See you this afternoon for the LACNOG sessions.